the Minds at Work community. Today, we are joined by the co-founders of Minds at Work, and we're going to go back to basics and talk about making the business case for prioritizing mental health and well-being in the workplace. According to a recent Deloitte report, 61% of people leaving their jobs cite mental ill health as the reason for their departure, but you can do something about this. We know this issue deserves more attention, more budget, and more investment. So how can we move the needle on well-being at work? How can we take it from an annual event to a strategic priority in the boardroom? Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Jeff McDonald and Georgie Mack, the people who organised the very first event that led to the Minds at Work movement. Jeff McDonald is a global advocate, campaigner and consultant who is passionate about addressing the stigma of mental ill health in workplaces and about helping organisations embed purpose as a key driver of business performance. As a strong believer that the global movement for positive mental health in the workplace needs more voices, Jeff is the co-founder of Minds at Work, whose purpose is to inspire and empower individuals to break the stigma of mental ill health in their own organisations. Hello and welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Lauren, and hello everybody who's joined us today. And there are lots of names that I recognize, so very good to have you all. Thank you.
Great stuff. And we also have with us Georgie Mack, who is the CEO of Peopleful and co-founder of Minds at Work. She's passionate about creating workplaces where people are motivated, energetic, purposeful, and happy. A lot of her career has been devoted to practicing human-centered design, and she believes that this, coupled with the right data, is the key to creating positive and lasting change in organizations. So welcome, Georgie.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. And likewise, I can see some lovely familiar names. So good to have you here.
Nice one. So here's how today's going to work. We will start with Jeff and Georgie sharing thoughts and ideas around the topic, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. We use an online system called AHA Slides to run the Q&A. So April is just going to share a slide that has a QR code on it. If you want to join in on your phone, don't look at April's emails. If you look at the slide, there we go. You can snap that QR code to join in on your phone, or you can go to ahaslides.com/mindslides, which Karis has just popped into the chat for you as well. And you can follow that along on your browser window. When we get to questions, feel free to ask questions as we go using that system. And you can also upvote questions. If you think you see something someone else has asked and you think, yeah, I want to know that, you can press the little arrow to upvote it, and it will go up the line. And at the end of the session, we're also going to show you how to continue this conversation within our virtual community, which you joined to join in this event. So if you've got time to stick around, that would be great. And there's also going to be an opportunity for some networking in breakout rooms after the session as well, if you've got a little bit of time to just say hi to some people. And as a reminder, we're also going to be live tweeting during this event. So you can follow the hashtag Minds at Work to follow and participate if you would like to. But now let's get started. Maybe if we remove the QR code and we can jump into our questions. So let me start with Jeff. If I could ask you, what has brought you to work in the area of mental health and well-being? Why is this so important to you?
Before I answer that question, Georgie, can you believe we've got so technically competent with all this wonderful social media stuff and this amazing way of getting stuff out there compared to that first meeting that we had many years ago in your offices on Regent's Canal, where we had to cobble together a table and a flip chart to make things work. But anyway, how did I get into all of this? I suppose there were two occurrences in my life. The first one was back in 2008, while I was working for Unilever, doing this big job looking after all of our home care division around the Unilever world from an HR point of view. And I wake up one night, middle of the night, and I have a panic attack. And that panic attack is the beginnings of me spending 3 months out of the office, not able to work, diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. The only thing that kept me alive in my darkest moments is I learned to get onto a path of recovery was probably two of the most powerful emotions in the world. One was called love, and the other one was called hope. And knowing that I was loved and having a sense of hope were probably the two most powerful ingredients that led to my recovery. And I use the word recovery reservedly because I work every single day of my life to maintain my recovery as somebody who is susceptible to anxiety-fueled depression. But the only reason I could experience that outpouring of love and that sense of hope is because I was very open about my illness. After being diagnosed, I decided that I would not be burdened by the stigma that is associated with the illness. And I was able to talk to my family. I was able to talk to some of my close friends. I was able to tell my colleagues at work. And probably down to every single individual who knew about my illness, what I got back from them was the most wonderful outpouring of love. And one person in particular who gave me so much hope that allowed me to have and see a little light at the end of the tunnel. And I think those two emotions were so powerful in my recovery. And yes, I then went back into Unilever. 2010, I had a bit of a relapse, nothing as bad as 2008. And then in October of 2012, and this probably, Lauren, was the real catalyst which led me into the work that I've been doing over the last 10 years. And it was the loss of a very good friend to suicide. I was leaving the office one evening. I got a call as I was getting onto Blackfriars Bridge here in the UK, because we've got some people from Hong Kong and South Africa on our call today. In fact, a good old colleague of mine from South Africa, Rory van der Merwe. So hello, Rory. And I get onto the bridge, my phone goes, and it's Debbie, my wife. And she said to me, Jeff, I've got awful news. One of your close friends died by suicide this afternoon. And, you know, I got into bed that night and I lay there and I kind of came to a very simple conclusion. And the conclusion I came to was that stigma had just killed my friend. The insight I had was I'd been able to talk and he hadn't been able to talk. He was an alpha male, very macho, South African. And there's just no ways he could talk about his mental and emotional struggles. And so I just felt that that was an injustice. I thought it was unfair that he hadn't been able to talk and maybe experience a sense of love and hope like I had, and maybe recover. And I'm not saying to anybody today that had he been able to talk, he would definitely be alive today. But what I am saying is that had he been able to talk, I want you to think of a grain of sand. There's a tiny chance he would still be alive today, a tiny, tiny chance. And I just thought, you know what, I want to do something about that. I want to deal with this injustice in the world. So that night I wrote to Alistair Campbell, who was doing a lot of advocacy and campaigning work with Time to Change here in the UK. Within 10 minutes, I had a response from him. A week later, we met up in Belsize Park. And ever since that day, November of 2012, I began a journey filled with a very deep sense of purpose. And that is to try and create workplaces all over the world, but not only workplaces, family groups and friendship groups where people feel they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and to just ask for some help if they're struggling mentally or emotionally. I co-led some work in Unilever around breaking stigma for about 18 months. And after seeing some of the amazing results of that work, I decided to leave Unilever middle of 2014 and journey this path filled with a deep, deep sense of purpose. So that's kind of how I've come to the whole area of mental health, well-being, etc.
Great stuff. Thank you for sharing that, Jeff. And certainly your journey has inspired a lot of people over the years as well. And you're getting a lot of love in the chat as well. So thank you for sharing. Georgie, same question to you. Why is this so important to you and what's been your journey?
Yeah, so my journey was a little different from Jeff's, although they kind of eventually conflated. So mine was, I used to work for an innovation consultancy called IDEO, and we were doing a big project, you know, trying to get employees to be more physically active in the workplace. And during the course of that project, I met a really inspirational character called Professor Steve Feast, which is a brilliant name. And he said, you know, yes, all this physical stuff, it's really important, but I wish someone would go and take a look at what's going on with mental health and the workplace, because it's in an absolutely dire strait, and yet we're hearing very little about it. And so I literally went off and looked at the stats around what was going on and thought they were really alarming, and thought that given the organization I worked for, that we should really be proactively going out in the world and looking to do more. And and realized that the workplace is an incredibly powerful touch point to reach people. And like Jeff said, it's this, it's not just employees, it's their families, their loved ones, their friends. So very, very powerful in terms of the kind of ripple out effect that you could also create. And obviously, even though this was still 10, 11 years ago, the idea of maybe being able to take some of the burden away from the NHS if we could, given that I think it's really, really challenged, even more so than ever now, in particularly in the mental health care space. So that's how I came into it. And, the more immersed I became, I mean, since then, there have been friends around me, people very close to me who I've also kind of seen go through their own mental ill health. But to the question of why it's important, for me, it's, we spend a ridiculous amount of time in the workplace for it to be anything other than a really kind of positive, rewarding experience. And although I think we've traveled quite some distance since, for example, Jeff and I first met, and since the kind of genesis of Minds at Work, there are still so many toxic workplaces out there. I mean, I feel really strongly about this. There's a really great McKinsey article, which we should post after this, which talks about, I think they ran this research across 15 countries, and toxic workplaces were still the kind of, the main reason, the main predictor for negative employee outcomes. And even anecdotally, if you just speak to people, you get this kind of visceral sense of that there's still a long distance to go. And I think, when we look at the world around us now and we see so much uncertainty on so many different levels, that having the workplace as a kind of positive antidote to that feels like something really powerful. And also the whole reason why we're gathered today, which is it also makes really, really good business sense. Having a kind of healthy, energetic, flourishing workforce, it just feels logical that from that you're going to get a kind of a better, stronger, more sustainable performance from the people that you employ. So I guess those are really the main reasons, that long time in the workplace and we still have a long distance to travel to make those workplaces a really fruitful, rich experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Georgie. And yeah, I've definitely been in a few toxic workplaces and they're not fun to be in. So it's such important work. I'm wondering, you both talked about the journey that you went on to come to this point. I'm wondering, perhaps if we start with you, Jeff, on this one, how the landscape has changed as you've traveled your journey in mental health and wellbeing, the landscape for the workplace wellbeing side of things.
Yeah, look, I think, that's a big question, Lauren. And I think, it all depends which part of the world I might be in when you ask that question. All right. So in the UK, I think we have seen a very positive move towards normalizing the conversation around mental ill health. I think campaigns like Time to Change, the Royals getting involved in the Heads Together campaign, organizations and workplaces really beginning to focus on the whole area of stigma and addressing the stigma of mental ill health. And I think, the UK, Canada, Australia have made some really, really good progress. But, there are still other parts of the world, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, the US still, I think, has a very strong John Wayne mentality around this stuff. So I think we've, from a UK point of view, I think we've seen some very good progress. And I think that has been confined mainly to larger organizations who've got the resources, both financial and human, to dedicate to programs to try and address the stigma of mental ill health. One area that is of very, very close to my heart and of deep concern continues to be small, medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. And I think that's why we at Minds at Work want to be playing a far more active role in being able to support and help small and medium-sized enterprises address the stigma of mental ill health. And then finally, I think, COVID in many ways accelerated this conversation. I often say that it democratized mental ill health right around the world. So not just in the UK, it democratized mental ill health, COVID, and it accelerated some of these conversations. And I think we're seeing some organizations, as a result of COVID and the goodwill that attending to the well-being of their people during lockdowns, etc., created, I think you've begun to see this whole concept of not just mental health, but employee well-being percolating at least into the boardroom for conversation around the well-being of their employees. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. So I think, I think that's what's happened. I think that, there has definitely been progress. But as Georgie said, I still think that there are many, many toxic workplaces where yes, we might have addressed the stigma, but guess what? We are still got processes and systems and policies in the organization that are stressing people out to the hilt and diminishing people's lives rather than enhancing people's lives. And I've often said that workplaces should be enhancing people's lives. It gives people a sense of purpose by going to work. It gives people a routine, the opportunity to be part of a community. I mean, there are so many positive things about work and going to work. However, we've created these places where I think in the main we diminish people's lives rather than enhance them. So I think that's the next best big hurdle is how do we create workplaces that truly, truly enhances the lives of every employee that's working there.
Absolutely. Georgie, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
I suppose the only things I would say, and really in support of what Jeff was saying, that I mean, the conversation has normalized somewhat, which is brilliant. And I think there is more empathy and compassion than there's ever been around this topic. I think it's quite interesting because the pandemic, it did well-being mental health and well-being so many favors on one hand, but then we're now left with this situation where we've got still so many unanswered questions, and so the idea of flexibility and what that means, and it's quite interesting going to events at the moment where organizations feel like they don't really know the answers. They don't know the emerging world of work and what it should look like. They're not quite in possession of what good is. So I think there's some big unanswered questions that have almost come into play since the pandemic. I think there's a few other interesting things as well, though, which is that a little bit the kind of the seat of power shifting a little bit, and with the huge attrition rates that we've seen across lots and lots of industry sectors, this idea of employees perhaps, being able to vote with their feet more than ever. And particularly, I think with some of the younger generations, what they will demand of the workplace in the future is something that's also, I think, more visible. And the other thing, just that, my goodness me, there are just so many, I mean, in the world of well-being, well-being in the workplace, there are just so many providers and services, and it's a very, very saturated, quite confusing landscape, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really nice segue into our next question, Georgie. So I'll start with you. When we talk about mental health and well-being in the workplace, what do we really mean? What context are we adding there?
Yeah, no, I think that's well, actually, I think Jeff touched on some of that very nicely just now, which is, there's what we want it to mean, mental health and well-being in the workplace, which is all of the things that you said, Jeff, which is, we want it to be a place where people flourish, where they're motivated, where they're energetic, productive, where they're able to perform at their best. But I still think a little bit, that we're quite literal around well-being. It's sort of like well-being initiatives in are going to equal well-being out, and it's just not that simple. And I think a lot of organizations, and don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a terrible thing, but I just think it needs to be bigger than just this. I think lots of organizations focus in on the individual level, if you like, versus the role that the actual organization itself plays. So quite a lot of provision has been made for empowering employees to look after their own mental health and well-being, which is great. But I think in the process of that, sometimes organizations have missed out the enormous role that they can play. To Jeff's point, in terms of the systems, the actual organizational design, when we talk about toxic workplaces, what do we actually mean by that? We mean places where employees feel belittled, where they feel that they're not being recognized in the right place, where there's not the right social support around them, where they have untenable workloads, where they don't have the right resources they can draw on. So I think, there's this piece which is not being too literal about what wellbeing can mean, and that a recognition that solving it has got to be, the employers need to understand their role in this entire story, which I think is really important. And again, it comes back to this idea of if you can do good by your employees, there is an enormous business benefit back. And that might be through loyalty. I mean, especially talent attraction and retention now is just such a massive issue. So I guess, those are my kind of thoughts on what's really going on. And quite depressingly, I read an article quite recently, it was in the FT, where it talked about the return to the office, and it talked about do-gooder fatigue in reaction to the amount of focus that's been put on employee well-being, and that we need to kind of roll up our sleeves and kind of get back to business, and almost a sense of like we've tolerated and indulged all this well-being nonsense, and now let's kind of crack on. And it's always really disheartening when you read articles like that, because it feels like we've just taken about 5 steps backwards. So again, it's coming back to the topic of this conversation, which is, it's a really important topic from a kind of ethical point of view, but also it has a role to play from a business perspective, and we mustn't lose sight of that, because that gives us the best chance, I think, of affecting positive change.
Absolutely, it's not an indulgence, it is an important thing. Which Jeff, that brings us really nicely to the next question. You talk a lot about making mental health and wellbeing a strategic priority in an organization. So could you just talk a little bit about what you mean by that and what that might look like?
Yeah, and again, I mean, this is, these are, I mean, what I'm going to say now are really just insights that I've had on my journey over the last 9 years, and probably the biggest insight is the most limiting resource that I see in workplaces, irrespective of which sector I'm in or which part of the world I might be in. The most limiting resource that I see in workplaces today is the energy of people.
Yeah.
Okay, people are frazzled. They are frazzled. They can't wait for a Friday afternoon. That walk from the office to the station or the car park in the old days when everybody was in an office, or on a Friday evening closing down your laptop, the feeling that you get versus the Monday morning. I mean, people are frazzled. We've created workplaces that just suck the most critical enabler of an individual's performance, which is their energy. I mean, when we are energized and we get into the flow, we can move mountains. And we only get to feel energized if we are healthy in a holistic sense, physically, mentally, emotionally, and some people on the call today would say also spiritually. And so if there's this fundamental belief that the energy of your people is the most critical enabler of their performance, therefore their health and well-being is a critical enabler of their performance, then I often ask the question, why then is the well-being of your people not a strategic priority? Because every other strategic priority that a big organization or a small organization has is about enabling the performance of that organization. So just tell me why you don't want energized, healthy, happy people working for your organization. And it really frustrates me when we kind of see what it's either performance or it's well-being. So this FT article that Georgie talks about, okay, so let's forget about this well-being stuff and get on and roll up your sleeves, because it's a kind of either or. Well, it's not. It's an and. Let's have happy, healthy individuals who will perform in our organization. It's fundamental to performance. And so therefore, that's why I think, it should be a strategic priority. And I often wonder, why do well-being initiatives not stick in organizations? Why don't they stick? Why does it end up being a week called the Well-Being Week, where we have a lovely week of care and get McDonald in and Sophie Bostock and all these people and teach you how to sleep and all this stuff. And then the other 51 weeks of the year, I flog you to death, or I have a few bananas next to the till in the canteen. Or as Georgie said, I've given you an app, now go and sort yourself out. So for me, there are three reasons as to why it doesn't stick. The one is it's not a strategic priority in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't get the financial and the human resource investment that it requires. The second reason is there's no organization accountability to keep people healthy at work.
Yeah.
I'll keep you safe. I'll keep you physically safe at work. All right. I'll spend billions around the world in health and safety. Guess what? It all goes to safety. So I'll keep you physically safe at work. There's organization accountability. And the third reason it doesn't stick is there's no individual accountability.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll provide all these resources to you as an organization, but then 5% of employees use the resources because there's no sense of individual accountability. And in order to create that, this requires a transformation of the culture of the organization. This is not about a week called the Wellbeing Week or a banana next to the till in the canteen. This is a cultural transformation. And April, if you just share the slide, and I would like people, feel free to use this. It's a framework that I've developed around what might it look like? What might it look like if we were to make well-being a strategic priority? What would it look like? And please feel free to take this framework away, use it in your organizations to assess where you're at. But I think that there are a number of things that the organization has to do first from an accountability point of view. First of all, define what you mean by well-being. And in this framework, you can see a triangle, the Warwick-Edinburgh triangle, around the definition of well-being. But there are other frameworks and there are other definitions to well-being. But at least as an organization, number one, define what you mean by well-being. Secondly, put the resources in place that people can draw on to enhance each element of the framework, your well-being framework. So we've done very good stuff in the past around physical well-being, ride to work schemes, gym memberships, gym in offices, encouraging people to look after their physical health. But we've got to provide the same kind of resources to help people enhance their emotional health, their mental health, and create a greater sense of purpose and meaning at work. So the second thing an organization would do is put the resources in place, invest in resources to enhance all elements of your well-being framework that employees can draw on. The third is to address the stigma of mental ill health. We have to address the stigma, and that's going to take time. You might start there, take 18 months just to drive a culture in the organization where people can talk. So stigma and dealing with stigma. And then, as Georgie said, ways of working, understand, go in and look at the organization and audit, do a survey on the well-being of your people and get a sense of the ways of working. What is causing stress in this organization, causing anxiety? What are some of the small things that we could do differently to alleviate some of the stresses and the strain? So that whole piece around, I often say that if the flower doesn't bloom, there's nothing wrong with the flower. It's the environment it lives in. If you don't water it, if you don't give it a bit of fertilizer, it's not going to bloom. And too often right now, we have well-being being done to employees instead of the organization taking accountability to better understand their ways of working. And people say, how do I do that? Well, there are some amazing tools out there right now where you can go in and you can measure and you can understand this stuff in a far better scientific and evidence-based way. And then finally, leadership behavior, and getting leaders to behave in a particular way and expecting that of your leaders. So in your competency model, make sure that you've got something around well-being where leaders are going to role model how they look after their own well-being, and they're going to be leading in a way which is encouraging and enhancing the well-being and an expected behavior that is expected of your leaders. And for me, that's what organization accountability looks like. And then the individual accountability piece, for me, that comes later in the journey, where we start having, as part of people's development conversation in an organization, part of their development is not just about their skills, their knowledge, their behaviors, their experience. We'll also have a conversation about their well-being and create a future fit plan where individuals, if I as an organization have invested all this time and energy in bringing this framework to life, then I'm expecting you as an individual to use some of those resources. And so we'll have a conversation twice a year about your health, about your well-being. Why? Because it's the most critical enabler of your performance. And if you're struggling physically, well, then go and use these resources that we as an organization are offering you. If you're struggling emotionally or mentally, do a bit of this. So I think to drive the individual accountability piece, well, I want to see that in the development plans of individuals in organization as part of their growth, their development in that organization. So in summary, define your well-being framework, put the resources in place, address the stigma of mental ill health, audit your ways of working, get a measure around the well-being of your people. We measure what we treasure, shift the leadership behaviors, and then drive individual accountability through development plans, which will include not just going on a training course to get a new skill, but also what are you going to do to enhance and protect the most valuable and critical enabler of your performance, which is your well-being, your health.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That was so emotively delivered as well as very, very useful. I can see the passion there for you, which is great. And we will share that resource that Jeff just mentioned in the community as well after this. Georgie, I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts to add to that, but I'll also ask you if you've got any thoughts on people or organizations that are doing this well and what some of the challenges might be around this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Jeff, that was absolutely magnificently articulated as ever, and so very true. And I think that, just, I suppose the one thing I'd say is just, being able to do all of those things, but to, just to do them consistently. And I think even that, just being able to repeat them and do them consistently and role model day in, day out. It's not just something that goes on the radar that leaders kind of adopt for a short while and then kind of let fall by the wayside. So agree with absolutely everything there. I mean, in terms of doing a good job, I guess, that I think there are lots of organizations out there who are taking this very seriously, and who are kind of moving just beyond some of the usual wellbeing interventions, and really looking at getting that kind of foundational data. So a kind of baseline of understanding what is the mood and state of people within the organization, and recognizing that you need a number of different interventions at different kind of levels of intensity, if you like, if you're going to help people actually make a difference. And just really, again, it's those organizations where their leadership are really the biggest advocates for this. I think a really key thing for me is seeing the whole mental health and wellbeing piece, not just sitting within HR or within wellbeing, but being properly owned at a leadership level within the organization. So I do think, creating that big kind of sense of coherence across this and joining up the dots between all of the different things that are happening is a really key part of it. I mean, I think in terms of barriers, there's a few different things. I think, honestly, to really look into your organization and understand what's going on and be willing to hold a mirror up, I actually think that does take quite a degree of courage, because, if you think about that toxic stat that I flung around a little bit earlier, the chances are there are going to be some things that are really quite difficult to confront. And especially couple that with a degree of transparency, which will be expected from people within the organization. So I think it does take a lot of courage. There are going to be things that are difficult to countenance, and things that will require action. They will. I mean, they will feel, if you know that there are a certain percentage of people at critical risk of burnout within your organization, and you have that figure, there's a moral imperative to act on it. So I think courage is a really big thing. Just maintaining a sense of priority around this topic. Again, so many people we speak to, they do care about this topic, they do, but it just drops down the priority list so quickly. One of the other things that I think about, that I just wanted to touch on as well, is I just think sometimes the language of well-being, this is one of the things that I like to bang on about a little bit. The language of well-being sort of slightly, we kind of trip over it in a way, because I feel that it's like well-being sits over here and then the real stuff of business sits over here. And as Jeff said, it's not. There's an and that joins those two things up. And there's an amazing organisation that I work with called the Bank of Ireland, and they've got a great chief people officer called Matt Elliott, and he talks about the fact that you can be commercial and caring. And I think that that's a really important way of thinking about it, being commercial and caring. rather than it feeling like mental health and well-being sits to one side of business. But I do wonder, I mean, just as a challenge, and be really interested to know what people think out there, which is, would we be able to progress faster if we slightly sharpened up some of the language, around this? Do we need to move it? I mean, after all, we are in the kind of very heart of commerciality when we're talking about the workplace. And so I do wonder maybe whether perhaps, changing the language a little bit might be helpful. Maybe it's just well-being has got this kind of fluffy association that we're constantly battling to get away from. And maybe we need to think about things which sound a little bit kind of harder perhaps, but think about kind of human capital risk. I mean, maybe it's this sort of lexicon which might get this topic taken more seriously in some organizations. I think it will also help if we can try, I mean, there's lots and lots of initiatives that we hear about. And if you go to events around wellbeing, people will talk a lot about the interventions that they've done, about the wonderful initiatives they put in place. I do think I wish we talked more about the ROI, because I think that would also help enormously. And so often the ROI piece is missed out. I think because it's really challenging to get it. But I think if organizations really focused on trying to pursue a better sense of the ROI around all of this, it would also help shift the conversation.
Yeah, and it looks like people in the chat are agreeing with you there, Georgie. So that's really good to see too.
And by the way, and I don't think it's difficult to do that these days, the ROI. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we would have struggled. But now there are tools out there that will allow you to measure the well-being of your organization. They exist. So, and don't tell me that you just, we measure the well-being of our people because we got a few questions in the engagement survey. That's not good enough for me. I mean, engagement survey measures people's willingness to go the extra mile, their pride in an organization. And often there'll be 3 questions in the survey. Does your line manager care about your well-being? I mean, what an engagement survey does not measure people's ableness to go the extra mile. How able are they? When I was very ill with anxiety-fueled depression, I was willing to go the extra mile for Unilever. I was proud to work for Unilever. But you know what? I wasn't able to go the extra mile because I wasn't healthy. And so I think we should be using these tools out there to get a baseline, to understand what does the well-being of our organization look like, what are some of the drivers of poor well-being, and to then measure again in 2 years' time and see what the return on investment is.
And I absolutely agree. And I think that there is, and even the worst thing of all is that even when those 3 questions are tagged onto an engagement survey, they're changed 12 months later. So there is absolutely no consistency. So I think that's the other thing, that recognizing that some of these things will take time. Some things can happen quite quickly. I think some change can be effected quite quickly. But in other cases, it is about just the patience and the consistency of measuring and looking at that longitudinal analysis and figuring out what's making a difference where, and then telling that story, shouting that story from the rooftops, because we don't hear about those stories, as I said, very much.
Absolutely. I can see there are questions coming in, so I want to make sure we leave time to take questions from the room. But just a reminder for those in the room, you can join the ask questions via the AHA Slides link that April has been sharing in the chat. But if we just ask one more question while we wait for that to finish up, you're talking about all of the, the changes, all of the language, all of the things that have been moving, whether good or bad. And there is a lot of statistics out there, a lot of data out there, as you say, Georgie. Why do you think change is happening so slowly?
Well, I think one of the things is, because this is something that we wrestle with, and I remember having an amazing conversation with the COO of Bupa about this. I think there's something around that you can see all these stats out there, but and it is a bit like someone else's kind of holiday photos in a way. But until you actually know your own stats, until it's something about your organization, I just don't think it sticks in quite the same way. It's just too easy to ignore. But if you've got that data for your own organization, I think leaders would sit up and pay more attention, perhaps. So it is back to that data point and gathering that data and understanding the ramifications of poor mental health and well-being on the bottom line, because it's profound. So I think that's one of the things. I think I also think generally it's an observation on the market at the moment, that there are so many providers out there. I think it's a really confusing landscape for employers who perhaps want to move away from some of the more traditional listening tools. I think it's really difficult to navigate what's the right thing to be doing, what are the right tools to be using, what is the right approach to take. And then I guess it's a little bit this fear of, that when you do kind of use different diagnostics, that there's going to be these huge, really costly interventions that are required. And if anyone is out there who's listening to this, what we see over and over and over again is actually lots of small changes done in many places can really start shifting how an organization, how the workplace is experienced into a more kind of positive direction. Jeff, I'm sure you've got some things to add to that generally as well, in terms of why we think things are moving so slowly.
No, I think you've said it all, and I want to give people who are on the call an opportunity to ask some questions, so I won't add to that.
Okay,
awesome. Thanks very much, Jeff and Georgie. But yes, let's move to the questions, and I can see the links being popped in the chat if you have anything to add in terms of questions while we're talking. We do have a few. We've got a question in from Michael, who's asking what the role or impact of or overlap with organizational culture we have in this topic.
Well, I think it's synonymous. I think that, it's about shifting the culture of the organization. And so that framework that I shared with you, that's not something that you're gonna execute overnight. It's gonna take time, to build in well-being into the leadership development or competency model in your organization. It's going to take some time to address the stigma of mental ill health. It's going to take time to do your audit and get a measure and understand what are some of the organizational infrastructure issues that need to be addressed. But I think if you over time address all of those elements of the framework, I think the ultimate outcome is a more caring culture within the organization, where both the organization and the individual understand the importance of this. They behave in a way where we are, at the end of the day, trying to enhance the life of all our employees such that they will perform at their best and deliver, the expected financial results that the organization needs. So for me, this is about a cultural transformation. And it's about applying that framework to over time bring about that cultural change. And culture is not like electricity where you switch it on and off.
No.
It takes time to shift the behaviors of leaders, and it takes time to address some of the processes and the systems and the infrastructure of the organization. And if we do both of those, then I think the ultimate outcome is a different culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think culture is an output of many other different things. And I think, as Jeff said, it's just being able to go in and understand what the kind of workplace climate is right now. How are people experiencing it right now? And understanding where there are kind of shortfalls in that in order to address that. And then the ultimate output is a change culture.
If I could ask a follow-up to that, because this is something that takes time. We're not talking about, as you say, it's not a switch you can switch on and off. And business is, especially a big business, is very much about the next quarter, not necessarily the long term when it comes to shareholders. How can we keep up the pace that's needed? I
would say, so yes, a lot of these things do take time. But again, if you can get some specificity around what's driving some of the more negative experiences in the workplace, if you can get to that causality, I think that's where you can actually co-create with the people who are experiencing that and make a difference far more quickly than you think. I mean, the thing is, we are surrounded in the workplace by incredibly creative, resourceful people. And I think if you can get them around some of these issues and work with them to try and solve it, you can actually move quite quickly. I think, and of course, the longer term, I think, yes, of course, some things take longer to change and embed, but there are quite often more quick wins than organizations realize, right under their noses.
I mean, and also I think it takes a bit of courage from a board, you know. I mean, I worked for an organization called Unilever, where the CEO went to the market and said, no more guidance. He said, I cannot manage the transformation of this organization and the culture by having to then every quarter come and tell you what my results are. So I am not going to give you guidance on a quarterly basis. Yes, I'll talk about the year, and I think we should encourage. I mean, it's not as if he got fired. In fact, it led to the complete transformation of Unilever by not having quarterly guidance. And so I think we should encourage more CEOs and chairs of boards to be going down that route of saying there's no need for quarterly guidance. I think the other thing in any change initiative, Lauren, is you need to celebrate some of the successes early on in the change.
Yeah.
Early on. And I can tell you can get some of the successes out of this stuff. There are some stories to be told across the organization, and you should celebrate those, and you should share those stories across the organization to sustain the momentum in bringing about the culture that is going to reinforce the strategy and drive the performance of the organization. And remember, when strategy and culture collide, there's only one winner every single time, and it's culture. It eats it for breakfast every time.
Yeah, but I have to say that is a brilliant point, Jeff. Those celebrations and the storytelling internally, absolutely huge. And they don't need to be giant stories. They can be small stories told loudly. And I think that's such an important piece.
Absolutely. Cool. So we've got a question from Paul Dorrington that's come in, and Paul asks, do you think it's getting better for unemployed people who have a mental ill health condition in regards to recruitment and not being discriminated against if they disclose their condition when applying for work?
Paul, lovely to hear from you, my friend. Hey, and you've probably got the answer to that question because you've more expertise in this area than I am. But I suspect people are still very, very scared of revealing the fact that they might have had a mental ill health challenge. I think that there's still, and particularly now, you know, if I look at the environment right now, cost of living crisis, the way in which organizations are trying to reduce costs, I think there's significant pressure on people right now. So I think more difficult would be my guess, Paul.
What do you, Paul?
What do I think? I think from our end, because we do a lot of this, it's hit and miss. I was just wondering around the cultural kind of perspective. So, I mean, we manage okay. A lot of our clients do disclose. It's very difficult to know what's really happening because you can come up with several reasons why someone doesn't get shortlisted or offered a job. It's just very difficult to know the facts.
But you know, Paul, I think there's a narrative we've got to get out there. I was asked this question by journalists once upon a time, which said to me, you know, why on earth would you ever recruit somebody who had a mental ill health challenge in the past? Why would you ever do that versus somebody who hadn't had that? And you know what my response was? And I don't think we tell this story enough, but my response was, you know, that person who's had a mental ill health challenge, they've just overcome a significant challenge in their own lives. They've come through that challenge. Yeah. You know that person is probably a far better listener. They've learned to listen. You know that person is somebody who's probably far more in tune and better caring and understanding of mental ill health challenges in the workplace. So they'll be looking out for it. Do you know that person is probably a better human being? They are more human in their approach to leadership and being with other individuals. And you know what? I would love to have more human beings running and leading organizations instead of some of the narcissists that I see out there. So bring it on, people who've struggled in the past. But I think we should talk more about, you know, I often say that, Paul, my breakdown was my breakthrough in life. I honestly believe I'm a better human being as a result of it. Now, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I honestly believe that. And I don't think we talk about the positive impact that a really difficult period in your life can have on the individual and on others.
100%. And I mean, what we do in terms of selling our clients to employers is we talk about skills and attributes. We talk about those qualities. One thing we've done for 20 years now in our NHS trust is we have personal experience of mental ill health as a desirable quality on our job descriptions, which has worked really well because people feel it's actually part of our job description that brings those strengths and qualities. And I'd love to see that happening in a broader world. But thank you, Jeff and Georgie. I'll shut up because there's loads of people here. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. So we have one that's very pertinent that's coming from Janine. And Janine would like to know your thoughts on how to improve workplace mental health when staff are not returning to the workplace, or the hybrid working situation that we're finding ourselves in. Anyone want to jump in first? I can see Jeff shaking your head.
I've got such my answer is going to be so provocative, but I just think we should have people back at work. I just think that people need to go back to work, and go back to work not 5 days a week, but I think people should be back in the office 3 days a week. I think we should be making it obligatory, and get away from this barrier that we've created and caused by having people away from work, working virtually, finding it really difficult to get on top of these issues. And I think the way to get on top of it is to encourage your employees to get back into the office.
Sure. Georgie, anything to add?
I'm not sure that's so crazily crazy. I mean, it's just, again, we see that play out in the organizations we work with, in the data as well. And it just, people are often just estranged and really struggling, and they're the people who've moved, they're far away from the office, it's harder for them to come back in, even in a kind of hybrid sense. And I think this idea of, I think I once posted on this quite recently, but there was someone at a conference recently who said the new out of office is the back in the office, because that's really, when you go back in the office, that's where you're picking up your kind of, your workplace social connections again. That's where you're interacting with people. It's, it's where you're, where you're co-creating, where you're together, and that's what you should be kind of celebrating and doing in the office. And I just think it's a really powerful thing, and it's really difficult. Gosh, I find it so difficult being not having an office anymore. But yes, so I tend to agree.
Okay, I think that's probably something we could spend an entire day speaking about at another time. So maybe if we close that there, and just we're coming to the end of our session. So I'm going to ask you in a moment, Jeff and Georgie, for any final thoughts that you want to impart to the people. But while you're thinking about that, I do just want to share how those in the room can keep this conversation going. We do have, of course, our virtual community, and April's going to share the screen again just to show you what's going on. So you will have signed up for this community to join this event, and you'll see that we have several groups that are built up to enable conversation, whether that's sharing resources, asking questions of your peers, or otherwise. You can, of course, post in the general feed, which you saw just before, but there is also groups that you'll discover on the tab, and we have set up a very special group just for to continue this discussion about the strategic business case, which you'll see at the top there. So you just need to click on that, join the group, and continue the discussions that you've had here. And we've only been open for a few months, but we've already held a plethora of events and conversations to help you build more mentally healthy workplaces. And you'll find recordings of those over in the library section of that navigation as well. Lots and lots of talks, lots more to come. We have one-on-one conversations a couple of times a month. We have a monthly event like this one, lots to come. So please do keep in touch with the community and keep talking to each other and sharing those thoughts. But while we are sharing the screen, April, I think you wanted to ask for some feedback from people as well. So could you perhaps just explain what you want to happen there?
Yes, please. So on the same slide where we just were. So just 3 simple ratings for us, please, guys. Tell us whether you were inspired by the session, whether you feel equipped with anything new, tools or knowledge to take back to the workplace, and whether you would recommend Minds at Work to others. And then after that, if you have any ideas for future events, any feedback on that session, there's a free text slide. So it's on the same slides where you were just asking your questions, or click on that link, which is in the chat. And then after this, I believe we're going to have some informal networking, because I know there's a lot of people in this room who have been to Minds at Work events in the flesh years ago, and you might want to have an informal chat. So we're going to open the breakout rooms to allow that to happen. And in order to mill around and talk to the people who you're most interested in, all you have to do is press the breakout room button at the bottom of your screen. Can everyone confirm that you can see a breakout room button? And then
Just shaking. of
you will
heads.
be able to choose. I'll open 4 breakout rooms. So those are going to be open in a minute, and you will be able to just click join. And let's see. Yes. So
Yeah,
now,
okay.
from now, you can actually join at any time, one of the 4 breakout rooms, and chat to people here. So thank you very much.
But before you do that, let's just wrap up. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to pass over to Jeff and Georgie for the final thoughts. Jeff, perhaps we come to you first. Anything you'd like to say as a wrap up?
No, just, I mean, people have joined this because they're interested and they're passionate about this work. So keep up the great work in whatever capacity you are engaged in. So thank you. And I'm going to have to sign off because I've got to go and jump on an airplane. So bye-bye.
My God,
No worries.
fly
Thanks,
safely. I suppose my only thing I would say is as to anyone who is an employer or part of leadership within an organization, that there are more things within your control than you think. So if you can understand, if you can get the insight, you can get the data, I think that there is more you can do than you realize. And I would just go back to small things done in many places can make a huge difference to how employees experience the workplace. And that's it, really. Thank
Great
you.
stuff. Thank you,
for hosting.
Georgie. Thanks again to our guests. Thank you all for joining us live in the room, or if you're watching the replay, thanks for checking in with us. As promised, if you've got some time to hang around, April has set up those breakout rooms. You should see a big red button on the bottom of your screen and you can jump in there. Click join when you see a group of people you'd like to chat with, or just pick a random one. And if you're leaving us now, thanks again. I look forward to seeing you around the community, and please do jump in there, have conversations, ask questions. It's all there for you, and it's very much, driven by the community itself. So thank you again. Thank you, Georgie, and thank you to the absent Jeff. I hope he has a good flight. Okay, right, bye.